coffee in my car. I'll be right back.
I'd like to call the School Board of Sarasota County May 18th workshop to order. I understand our first item of agenda is the strategic plan, and we've got Corey Gordon online. Dr. Asplin?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Corey, are you online there?
Hi there. Yes, I'm here.
Yes, hi. Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate that. I know we had a couple of meetings last week, and I know you want to give our board an update as far as where we are with our strategic plan at this point in time. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Perfect. All right. Let me just make sure I've got my screen share ready. Can you all see this, and can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can see that.
Great. All right. So it's really wonderful to be present, although virtually present with you all today. I had the privilege of speaking with each of you as part of the preparation for today's conversation, and I'm just excited to get to share the results of the work that we did to understand the Sarasota schools' organizational capacity to deliver. And so this first phase of the strategic planning process, as you will remember.
Corey, one thing, can you get a little closer to your microphone so we can hear you a little bit better? Thank you.
Yes, I might turn my video off then otherwise, because you might be seeing right up my nose if I do that. Let's see, is that better? Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can hear you better.
Great. So as we mentioned when we shared the sort of kickoff last month, this first phase of doing what we call a capacity review allows us to really understand deeply where the district is, what are the strengths, what are the challenges, and therefore, what should we prioritize or focus on in our strategic planning work. So that was the goal of the conversations and the surveys that we did, the town hall meetings that you all have been conducting. And so what you'll see reflected today is really the synthesis of all of that information, sort of boiled down into a couple of key areas that we believe are critical for any organization to implement change effectively and to really deliver results. And so that's what this is all about. I'm going to share this with you today as a real honest assessment of this moment in time in the district. So just recognizing, of course, that it's a very unique moment in time for all school districts in terms of the pandemic that we're all emerging from. And so this is really a snapshot in time. If we came back and did this same process a year from now or even 6 months from now, we would expect the results to look quite different. And so what we did was we gathered all this information, we used these 15 elements to ground our assessment, and now we also held a self-assessment with the leadership team, the cabinet at the district, to see where they thought the district is. And what I'm pleased to share with you is that they're very self-aware in terms of where the strengths and challenges lie, and their ability to understand, therefore, what it is that the district really needs to get right in the next couple of years. So I'm excited about the opportunities and really excited to share these results with you. One other note is that we use a 4-point scale, a color rating scale, when we do this assessment. There's a number of reasons for that, including just the ability to visually represent, as you'll see toward the end, what we call a heat map of progress that will allow us to really quickly scan and hone in on those areas in need of improvement. You'll see this 4-point scale in a number of the processes that we run with the district. And so that scale is meant to be a relative areas of strength and challenge. So it goes from red, then what we call amber red, amber green, and green. Just a note that red doesn't mean terrible. Red could mean or could signal that something is just an area we haven't gotten to yet, or an area that's emerging at this point. Similarly, green doesn't mean perfect, right? Things that are green are relative areas of strength for the district. There's always room for improvement, but we always want to call out those places where we're seeing the district doing things quite well, both in terms of their own historical performance, but also relative to other districts that we've worked with. So I'm going to share these results, and then I'll have a chance to I'm going to give you a chance on each slide to ask any clarifying questions or probing questions, or to share any reflections on how this resonates with you. So that's sort of how this will go. And then at the end, we're also going to share preview for you a revised vision and mission proposal that the district team, the steering committee, has put together for your review. So that's how this is going to go. Are there any questions about the process before we dive in?
I don't see any at this time.
Thank you so much. All right. So this is the framework that we use. And again, this is based in having done this work in lots of different organizations. And we're going to walk through each of these elements in turn, thinking about where is the district right now? Is this an area of relative strength or challenge? And therefore, what are the places we really need to build our capacity in order to successfully deliver a plan? And so this really is not just about writing a good strategic plan. This is about making sure that the plan that we write is actually implementable, that we can actually put it into practice. So that's why we think this process is so important. I'm not going to spend too much time here because I'm going to get into the details of each of these in just a minute, but just to sort of give you a summary, there's 5 big buckets here. You'll see them labeled here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The first is about the foundation. This is really sort of, do you have goals? Do you understand where you are? Do you have a group of people who are supportive of your goals? The second piece is really about understanding the challenge. This is where data use comes in. The third is about your plan. Do you have a clear plan with a strategy and an understanding of who needs to do what? The fourth bucket is about how well do we actually monitor progress and problem solve against that plan? And then this fifth bucket down here is about how well do we have a culture? What is our culture like? Does our culture actually support implementation? Do we have good capacity building mechanisms, communication, relationship building, sort of the soft skills part of this work, right? So we're going to go through each of these elements and share, based on the evidence that we gathered, where do we think the district is? And therefore, at the end, we'll share kind of what do we think are the things that the district needs to really focus in on. In order to arrive at this assessment, we spoke to a large group of folks through a variety of focus groups and interviews, including all of these different district staff groups, the arts community, community foundations, principals, assistant principals, teachers, students, curriculum specialists, and school counselors. So we really tried to get a good cross-section of the district. We also looked, of course, at the survey data, accreditation report, additional proficiency data and performance review data that existed, and then, as I mentioned, the self-assessment that the cabinet did against these same 15 elements. So I'm going to start with that first bucket around foundation for delivery. So the first question is, how well defined is our aspiration? Does the district have a clearly articulated and shared aspiration? And this is a relative area of strength. We said amber, green, or yellow in this area. There is clearly a cohesion in the district around improving outcomes for all students. There's lots of phrases folks use around every student, every day, working as one, and folks in general seem to support that idea. The next level of that, though, of translating those goals into SMART goals, you might be familiar with that phrase, specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, and time-bound. Those are not yet existing, right? Which is exactly why we're going to do this process together. People are eager to understand more about what exactly does success look like for Sarasota County. So that's really the what would it take to get to green in this area, is to get a little more specific about those outcomes. The second, and again, I'm going to pause at the end of this slide for any questions. The second piece here is around, does the district regularly reflect on its capacity to drive progress? So do we understand where our capacity gaps are? And are we able to therefore target those gaps, right? And this is a place where we're not red, but we're not great at this yet. We know that capacity is stretched thin, particularly after this past year. And there's leadership is aware of that. The challenge, of course, though, is kind of how do we find a solution to those constraints, especially given the fact that we're always trying to keep our district staff, right, slim. We don't want to be perceived as being top heavy. And so how do we address some of those capacity gaps in a way that's strategic, but also maintains most of our resources in the classroom? So that's why you see an amber red here. This 1C category is not rated, and that's because this is unique to sort of our approach and our methodology of strategic planning. We believe that it should be someone's job or a part of someone's job to actually focus on implementation and progress monitoring. Right now, that doesn't exist in the district. Everybody does that as part of their job, but we believe, and we've seen organizations be a lot more successful if it's somebody's job to think about. But I know the superintendent is eager to think about how do we make sure that this is the priority for someone without adding more to people's already full plate. So we have some thinking to do about what that looks like, but this is something we're going to be working with him to solve. And then this fourth bucket under the foundation piece is about a guiding coalition. So this is not a formal coalition necessarily, but this is who's on the superintendent's speed dial, if you will, right? When it comes time to really try to push forward and push toward this aspiration, is there a group of people outside the district office who are going to help drive progress toward that aspiration? And this is a place where I think we're amber red, not for lack of focus on this or effort, but really just by virtue of the superintendent being new, the pandemic. He's certainly focused on getting to know Sarasota community and sees this as a real priority, but building those relationships in a way that he'll be able to leverage them is still something he's working on, right? So I think that's why you see this as an area that's amber red. Let me pause there. Are there any questions first? And then I'd love your reflections as well, but let's start with questions.
Not yet.
Okay. Any reflections or anything folks are surprised or want to share in response to these ratings?
And we usually like you to go through the program. We'll come back and ask questions.
Okay.
Unless there's something burning for that specific issue.
No
But
problem.
I'll interrupt you and let you know.
I was going to say, you'll interrupt me then. Okay, great. That's wonderful. Okay, I will do that then. Thank you for that feedback. All right. So this second bucket here, as I mentioned, is really about data use. And it's two-pronged. The first piece here, 2A, is how well do we use data to evaluate performance, to understand trends and see where we've been in the past. And in general, that's something the district is quite good at. There's a lot of data. It's presented in lots of different formats, and it's relatively accessible. And I think people are very happy about the fact that data culture has really become something the district is stronger in, and has become a greater focus, right? So that's one of the green areas that we saw in our review. The flip side of that then is sort of how well do we understand a level deeper than that, right? Not just what does the trend show, but why, the root causes of what's underneath those trends and how our activities should be informed by those trends. And so this is a place where we're still emerging, right? There's lots of data, but how well we use that data to drill down into root causes and design targeted strategies is not something we're as strong at yet as we would like to be. And this isn't true at both the district and the school level, right? There's a desire from teachers as well to have data that is user-friendly and actionable, and then to build their capacity to actually use it to inform their instruction. So I think this is a place where the strategic plan could really support creating those mechanisms for using data in a more action-oriented way. This third bucket around planning, you won't be surprised, given that we are in the very beginning phases of our strategic planning, that this is in general an area that's more challenged across the board. The pure red here is around this first category, that does the district have a cohesive set of strategies that will help us achieve that that aspiration. And the reason that this is highlighted as a real red here is only because we believe this is so critical to unlocking so many of these other pieces. So while there's lots of good stuff happening, in some cases maybe too many strategies, it's not clear yet what are the non-negotiables, right? What are sort of the common language? What's the common language that the district is using around our top priorities? And then also the connection between those initiatives is not always as clear as it could be. And so if this area is one that we get sharper on and more focused in, we believe this is really a lever for driving so many of these other areas. And so that's why we highlighted this as a red, because it's such a critical aspect to get right for the district. And we are excited that the strategic planning process should help us do exactly that. We're just not there yet. 3B is about understanding, for all of the initiatives and strategies that are underway, do we understand how and through whom those actually reach the field? And this is another place where we're just not quite there yet. We're in the middle of a reorganization that's really trying to help strengthen the clarity of the delivery chain and ownership, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. Similarly, we've got some feedback loops where we're gathering information, but we're not quite sure how well we're using that information to adjust implementation. So there's some room for improvement here as well. And then in the third bucket here around targets, this is related to that aspiration and the SMART goals. Again, no SMART targets articulated that can really unify the district. So we need more tangible, measurable goals and accountability around those to try to make some progress on some of these persistent challenges. For example, the achievement gap. What is it we really want to do, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to that? So this planning bucket, again, my hope is 6 months from now, this will be much greener as we've done some work to clarify that strategy, to set some real clear targets, and to understand how those strategies are going to be rolled out. Our fourth bucket here is around how well do we actually implement? How do we drive the delivery of all of this work? And this is an area where these mechanisms are getting stronger. So that's really exciting, because it tells me that once this planning process is complete, there's already some strong foundational elements that will help us move into the implementation phase pretty well. So the first piece here is about routines. Do we have regular conversations that are focused on results and allow for action and problem solving? And this is an area of relative strength as well. There are lots of data-driven conversations happening, and district leaders bring data to the table to help make decisions. However, and this is the challenge, this is sort of what's keeping us from green, sometimes there's a challenge with follow-through. And that's particularly true, and this is not surprising. I see this in pretty much every district I work with. It's particularly true if that means stopping things that aren't working, right? It's really hard to stop doing things. And this is going to be a place where I, as a facilitator of this process, I'm going to have to push, I think, is to say, we can't keep doing things because we've always done them. We have to do them because we believe they're going to help us achieve our goals. And if we can't make a plausible connection, we need to seriously consider stopping or scaling back some of these other activities. So that's where we are on those routines. Problem solving. So in general, this is another strength. The district is strong on problem solving and really focused on doing what it takes, which, this has never been more true than in the past year, as folks had to pull together to tackle COVID. But there's so many challenges that it's hard to really figure out which ones are most important, rather than feeling like it's a constant fire drill of jumping from one challenge to the next. And these routines that we're putting in place for the strategic plan will hopefully help us do more of that proactive problem solving that will help to address some of these needs. And then finally, another real area I want to highlight as a strength: does the district maintain its focus through challenges and distractions? Well, I think we can all attest to the fact that there have been a lot of distractions and challenges in this past year, even more so than in a typical year. And the district has really, and got kudos from pretty much every group I spoke with, for their ability to keep going, to come together, to give credit where credit was due. And I just think this is such an impressive group of folks. And so while we're really excited to continue to build on that momentum, and hopefully as we return to more of a normal state, that will serve us quite well. The final category here around culture, the first two buckets here are around capacity and communication. So this first piece, again, this is an instance where the amber red here is more reflective in some ways of the fact that this is an area that is so critical to the success of the district. And so are we building capacity as a priority and in an ongoing way? And again, some of this is about just limited, staffing cuts that have happened that haven't been backfilled. And in particular, I heard this around some facilities pieces as well as mental health support. Again, given the challenges of the past year. This is also true, though, when it comes to training, and kind of, are we following through on our training, or just sort of ready, aim, fire, ready, fire, aim approach, where we're just kind of throwing a bunch of things out there and seeing what sticks, right? We want to make sure that everybody's getting that kind of concrete, focused professional development to grow as professionals through feedback and coaching. And we're not there yet. So this is another place where I think if we really double down in this area, you could see a lot of growth. Communications, does the district regularly communicate about the aspiration and the strategies to achieve it? Again, lots of kudos for the fact that this is much improved. This is an area that's improved. Lots of excitement around some of the central office messages, the town halls, the ability to provide that feedback. Folks are really happy about that. There's a continued need to focus on the rationale, the why, in our communication, and kind of bringing people's hearts and minds along with the work and the decisions that we're making. And so there's also a desire to have more of that sort of two-way engagement from staff. It feels sometimes like people who are going to be directly impacted are maybe not included in the conversation in the way that would be most helpful for them. And then the last bit here is about what we call the alchemy of relationships. And that's just to speak to how important this piece is. Are the relationships that are central to success identified, cultivated, and maintained? And this is where I think there's, again, some of this has really been strengthened as a result of COVID, and then in other places it's become really challenging. I think this is where some of the us versus them feeling of kind of district versus schools came out, not in a directly conflicted way, but more in sort of, we are the school people, that's the district folks, we're sort of not necessarily always on the same page. And so I think there's a real opportunity here to unify, again, with a clear aspiration, some clear goals, a clear set of priorities, to unify and to build some more trust here so that we can move in the right direction and all be rowing in the same boat, if you will. This is another place where kind of employee morale, and this is true across the country, has just taken a hit during the pandemic. People are tired and burnt out and had to do things they never thought they would have to do as part of their job in this past year. So I do think having more opportunities for just gratitude and appreciation. I know the superintendent is doing a lot of that, but not just him, everybody expressing that gratitude regularly and often can go a long way. So I think those are some of the other pieces that would help move this to a greener state.
On this slide, I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sort of surprising to me that there's a lot of people out there that feel the district has one goal, but schools all have their own goals that they're working on, and that there's certain groups that are feeling particularly overlooked and underappreciated. I'd like to hear more about that so that we can maybe turn those things around.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so I think on the first point about schools maybe being on a different page, I think in general, the general goal of improving outcomes for all students would be shared between schools and district. I think what's not quite shared yet, and I think it comes back to that strategy piece, is how much autonomy do schools have to get there, right? Is it, oh, well, I'm a school and I'm the school leader and I make these choices about what we do in my building in order to get to that? Or is it, these are the district's priorities and here's how my school is contributing or following or aligning to those? That's the piece I think that's missing. I don't think and if I said this, I didn't mean this, I don't think there's necessarily different goals. And you're right, I say this here, which I think I should have used a different word here around sort of strategies. It's really about sort of the how we're doing it versus what is it that we're trying to achieve. This is a quote from somebody and that's what they were referring to rather than actual sort of outcomes. And then the second piece around employee morale,
Corey?
I think.
Corey, there's another question or comment from Bridget Ziegler.
Sure.
No, and I'll be brief. Thank you, and Mrs. Brown, thank you for bringing it up because I brought that up. And I think, one of my questions is kind of looking ahead. I like to say I like us to have a system of good schools versus a good school system. And I think this district and this board has really put a lot of autonomy on principals, and I think that's a good practice to have. But looking ahead and I think this goes to the non-negotiables from the district level. How do we? I want to maintain that autonomy, but also kind of dive into Mrs. Brown's point of how do we overcome that sentiment. So I'm not sure if that's in your strategies looking forward.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good push. I mean, I think I'm not suggesting you necessarily want to get rid of the autonomy. I think the question is getting clear about where the autonomy exists versus where are the things that we do a certain way because we are part of Sarasota's county schools, right? So I think there's some places where you want more unification, and to your point, some places where you want more autonomy. And I think just getting clearer as a district about what that looks like will be important. On the employee morale question, I remember, and I can go back to my notes to get more detail around this, but I remember in particular some of the folks, sort of custodial staff, food service workers, folks who have really had to, in many ways, go above and beyond, feeling like there's been a lot of kudos, and this is true, right, across this country, for teachers and everything teachers have been through in this pandemic. But sometimes those folks who have had to really up their game in many ways don't get as much, credit or get highlighted as frequently. And so that was one of the things that came out, was just, it would be nice to hear, like, hey, thanks for staying late to do a deep clean of the building. We really appreciate that. Not necessarily just from the superintendent, but even from their school leaders, right? That there's just a lot of focus on teachers, understandably, but let's make sure we include other groups who have really had to go above and beyond as well. Does that help clarify your question?
Bridget? Yes.
Okay. These are great questions. Anybody else have any reflections before we move on to the sort of zoom out?
I see none.
Thank you. So as we zoom out, the reason, as I mentioned, one of the reasons for that color scale is it gives us this really nice heat map of where are our areas of strength and where are our opportunities for growth. And what's exciting to me about this heat map, and I'll say, having done, I haven't counted, but I've done probably upwards of 50 capacity reviews in my time. So I've seen a lot of these heat maps, and this is one of the greener ones I've seen at the start of a process. So there's a lot of opportunity here in terms of building on some of these strengths and leveraging them with this new plan, particularly here in this driving of delivery category. I think the big takeaway for me is it's a good thing we're going to do this planning process because there's a need, right? There's a need for a clear strategy, a little bit more understanding of how we're going to make a change and getting more explicit about that. So I hope and think that this map will change drastically as a result of the work that we're all going to do together on this plan. But in general, it's a really promising picture because it tells us we have a lot of things we can leverage as we do this planning process. I wanted to call out a couple of other things that came out as part of this work that were not necessarily fitting into one of these kind of capacity buckets, but that are more thematic strengths that came out. And I really want to emphasize this first one. The number one strength highlighted by pretty much everyone I asked is the staff that are just really committed to students, really passionate about this work, who show up even when things are really challenging. And so it's really an amazing, it sounds like an amazing group of people. And that's, you know, we all know districts and schools are built on people. So having that as a real strength is important. The second thing that came out as a theme is really sort of this collegial culture. Folks really like being part of the Sarasota School District. There's a lot of investment by the community and strong partnerships. I spoke to several of those folks. They're excited to continue those partnerships. The overall perception of the schools is strong, and a sense of team, again, that really was highlighted during the pandemic, doing what it takes for students. I give a lot of kudos for that. And then just the fact that district has a growth mindset. People were really grateful for the chance to participate in this process. And I remember vividly speaking to a group, I think it was the Food and Nutrition Services group, who said, you know, we've never been asked for our perspective before. So we're just so grateful that you've included us in this conversation. So that is something people are happy to see happening and would like to continue to see happening. And then finally, the third real theme that came out in terms of strength was about just the variety of school programming, technology being available, the arts and CTE programs, and in general, the growing graduation rate, with a sort of caveat around the gaps that exist that we know are still critical to address. The thematic areas of challenge that I wanted to draw attention to, and these will be things that I will work with the steering committee and the team to think about how we address, are around in the academic category around equity. So this concern, and I believe all of the board members I spoke with also highlighted this, right? This concern about sort of this persistent gap and how do we address that gap? And so this is true both for sort of racial and ethnic diversity, as well as students with disabilities. And we know there's been some work in that area with the PDP action plan required by the state. So we want to make sure the strategic plan is aligned with that. But in general, making sure all teachers have a mindset and are prepared to support all students. And that to me feels like a very important message that we need to continue to emphasize. College and career readiness, and sort of making sure that we are getting more students succeeding and ready for post-secondary opportunities. You've got a very high post-secondary enrollment rate. And then the question is sort of how do we make sure students are really adequately prepared from a both academic, but also executive functioning and soft skills perspective. So I think there's more to be done there, some of the things I heard. Excuse me. Another challenge, and this is a challenge everybody unfortunately is facing together, is emerging from COVID. In particular, a lot of concerns about the social and emotional impact on students and staff. This came through in the staff survey around just sort of how do I give students what they need? Do I have the ability to do that? And how do we make sure staff feel like their mental health and well-being is a priority? So those are some things I'm excited to think with the team about how to build into the strategic plan. The sort of political landscape of the community and the varying opinions and perspectives, how do we navigate that, is going to be a continued challenge and an area that the district is going to have to find its way through. And the sense of constant change. So I do think this is another piece, sort of how do we make sure that we're clear that we're not building the plane as we're flying it, that we've got a really strategic path laid out and that we stick to that. And I think this is a big theme for me, is how do we make sure that what comes out of the strategic plan is not to say that we can't adjust course when things don't go as planned, but really that what we don't want to do is throw and layer on a bunch of new ideas, because folks already feel like there's so much that they're managing, and that you're not going to get very far, right? So how do we make sure we've got a clear strategy and that we stick to it? And then finally, just the capacity challenges, right? So feeling like this is true for mental health. We talked about in particular the challenge to fill certain positions, particularly operationally, when we're not competitive salary-wise with the private sector, the need for diversity of staff and language as well, and then ongoing professional learning and coaching and creating that culture of professional growth. And then instructional coaching was also an area that was raised many times as something that folks are hungry for more of. So let me pause there. And now if there's any other questions or reflections, I would love to hear them from the group.
Karen?
Thank you very much. This is Karen Rose. I think you did a fabulous job in capturing all the details and things going on in our district. I'm very impressed. I have a question with the folks that you've interviewed. Did you include the Sarasota Classified Teachers Association in any of your interviews?
I believe there were representatives from there. Go ahead. Sorry, was someone going to jump in?
No,
I believe there were representatives included in my groups, but I can go back and double check that. I'm not sure if they would have identified themselves in that way, but we did speak with classified staff. I just don't know if any of them were representatives from that.
Well,
I know there were several teachers union representatives.
there were teachers union representatives?
Yes, most of the teachers I spoke to were teachers reps, actually.
Okay, thank you very much. Very well done. I'm very impressed. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Jane?
Well, I too want to say thank you. Great job. And I think not only from a standpoint of our strategic plan, as we are looking at now, I think there are some other nuggets, shall I say nuggets, in here of things that we will, I hope, look at maybe over the course of the summer and into the fall, particularly about data and who knows and who's on first, second, and third, and making sure, we can have the greatest dashboards in the world, but if people can't use them, what good are they? We can say, oh, we have these dashboards, but who, in fact, are using them? So I thank all the staff who work so hard on these things, but we really need to get down to some pragmatics. And I think you really fleshed out some things here that, Corey, that are really important for us to delve into in other areas. So thank you very much.
Tom?
Thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. There's, I wouldn't say any of this is easy, but there are some real concrete practical implications that can really shift and show the responsiveness of the team to this feedback.
Tom?
I think you did a great job of capturing the nature of the school district in its essence. One of the things that I know you touched on, but when I listen to some of the challenges and think back of my own process of getting to know the schools and the district, I think there's a step of improvement in and around communication that is touched on here, but isn't highlighted in a big enough way from my personal point of view. A lot of the misconceptions and challenges that you identify, I've never seen anybody intentionally behave we versus they, either the school or the district, but often it feels that way because there's just not enough clarity and enough communication in the processes. I think the other piece that you touched on was the folks that were appreciative that you included them in the process. And I hear that often, that the boots on the ground aren't asked often enough for their opinions and their process. So those are just the two. Other than that, I think you did a fabulous job, and I love that the mental health and the social, emotional conversation really bubbled to the surface. So thank you for your good work.
Thank you. No, I appreciate you making that point about communication. You're absolutely right. I do think there's sort of, it's not an intentional us versus them. It comes out, as you said, as a lack of, due to a lack of clarity. And then the piece around boots on the ground and being engaged, I think that's absolutely something I'm eager to start shifting with the strategic planning process. So thank you for highlighting that.
Bridget?
Thank you. No, I agree. I think this is wonderful from looking at it in a multitude of buckets at a high level, but drilling down. I would agree with Mr. Edwards and Corey. I know one of the things I highlighted was communication, and it almost overlays on every area. And I agree with Mr. Edwards that I don't believe it's intentional most of the times, if you will. It's just, as you mentioned, people are stretched thin. And so as we go into it, I think that communication piece is going to be incumbent upon tackling a lot of these goals, and it needs to almost be an overlay. If you look at the strategy going forward, how do you execute that? But one of the questions I have is, and this was, I took away was, we have all this data, but then and then we have well-intended, identify plans, but that follow-up and, looking forward, almost even same with this strategic plan, as we develop it, what is going to be those benchmarks of us following up for the, as a board, for the community, the superintendent, and for, how do we deploy that? Because if that's one of our biggest takeaways of where we have opportunity to improve as an organization, we all have to embed that in the same actionable items. So can you speak to that and how that looks for us going forward and how we create that?
Such a great question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah. So one of the big pieces, and I believe I shared, I can't remember if I shared this last time. I should have. If I didn't, I think I did, is we believe strongly in setting up the plan, but then also supporting the district and building the capacity of the district to set up that progress monitoring, both the internal system for looking at the data and having those conversations about progress, as well as the system for reporting to the board. So it will depend a little bit, and Dr. Asplund and I will work through together what this looks like and with your input, what's the best way for this to work for the board. But in most districts I work with, there's a semi-annual, so usually either twice a year is usually the average, sort of high level, but specific, high level is the wrong word, comprehensive, I should say, overview of progress that is shared with the board, that includes data on all of the metrics that are included in the plan, as well as implementation progress, feedback loops, those kinds of things. And so while we'll be doing that monthly internally, the district will be having monthly conversations, sort of rotating through the goals in the plan. The strategic plan kind of comprehensive report out to the board will happen twice a year typically. And again, we can build something, a calendar that works for you all. But that will involve sharing with you outcomes. Where are we seeing the data? Where are we seeing challenges, and where can the board kind of help us to address some of those challenges? So it's not just, my goal is that it's not just a report out, it's really meant to be a collaborative conversation about progress, driven by and focused in and anchored on the data. So that is absolutely something we'll be working to build.
No, and I agree. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, follow up. I agree with that. I think that a lot of these are going to be built, in continuation with those conversations, but as far as like a high level, where those benchmarks are, where do we want to be in, by August, and when those will be developed for the board for, semi-annual report, because what I fear is the reality is that people are stretched thin. They're drinking from a fire hose constantly. And so how do we make sure that this doesn't get away from us? That's just one question. And then the other one is, I've seen other districts have their agenda items identified once we have the completed 5-year strategic plan. Each agenda item is highlighted as to how it aligns to the strategic plan. And I'm not sure if our current e-agenda is available to do that. I know Novus, when the ones I've seen that before, and I don't think we're ready to spend that money, but are you familiar with that process? Because I'd be curious if we can aggregate some of that data at the end of the year to say, hey, these are all the items that were approved, even from a financial impact to align with X strategic goal. Are you familiar with how you deploy that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've definitely seen districts do that. I think, again, to your point of sort of what's the level of complexity, I absolutely think anytime you can align with the strategic plan and emphasize how the work you're doing is aligned to the strategic plan, we should absolutely do that. From a tracking perspective, there are softwares you can get that allow you to do that kind of tracking. I think I'm always a believer, and I think somebody alluded to this earlier, and sort of if we're going to use that data to do something differently, we should track it. But if we're not, if it's sort of just going to be, oh, that's interesting, we talked about goal 3 52 times this year. Okay, that's helpful, but it doesn't really, I'm not sure it's going to inform our action that deeply, right? So it's always a question of trade-offs. Is it worth investing in a software that will let us do that so that we can behave differently? Are we concerned, I guess would be my question, that much of what the board is discussing is not aligned, right?
No, great points. Just something for the board as we move forward to
No, it's a great thing to think about, though, for sure, is sort of how do we make, and I think there's ways to sort of ease into that, right? It doesn't have to all happen at once. We can start by just identifying it, where the alignment is there, and then if we find that that's really helpful or that there is a big misalignment, then we can find other solutions down the road.
Thank you.
I think this last page, I think, says a lot. That, we have this complicated political landscape we've got to try to tiptoe through and also overcome this feeling, from some of our employees that, we're always changing and, whatever way the wind blows, not to some extent, we have to do that because of what Tallahassee tells us. But we need to try to take things and not, just overthrow everything overnight, and make it a process and make sure that they still are involved. And I really like the way that you said that we need to have professional development, not only in our schools, but in our administrative offices too, because how effective can we be if we've got weak links in the district? So we need to be all working together and understand that we're taking this forward and that we're all a part of it. And I think that's something we need to do, and then try to do it without adding a lot of work onto someone and stretching them even thinner than they are. I know that Dr. Asplund has already taken some steps in reorganizing staff to more clearly define the roles and put more emphasis in those areas of mental health and students with special needs. And I appreciate that we're not waiting for you to tell us everything, that we're moving forward with some of those things. But
yes, there's a lot that's already underway.
Yeah, so I'm sure that, if we're jogging too far one way or another, that you'll help us come back to where we need to work with all of the staff. To create this culture that our community can buy in, and our teachers and our parents and our staff too. I mean, I think that's so important. We have another, I'm sorry that you had a comment to that, but I was just praising you. Karen?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. If I understood you correctly, Corey, you talked about having data progress monitoring for the board twice a year. I just want to share my sentiment as a school-based principal. I was progress monitoring every 4.5 weeks, which allowed for a lot of modifying and adapting to the needs directly in the classroom. I'd like to see, particularly in the first year of a strategic plan, and I think this is one of the most important things that we've done in recent years or are pursuing. I'd like to see that quarterly, not creating work for staff, but having access to the data and feedback on the resources, I feel is a very accountable piece for a school board member, and to share with our community as well.
No, I appreciate that feedback, and that's certainly something we can align around. And the good news is that because the district will be doing those monthly internal progress monitoring conversations, it should not be a dog and pony show or an additional layer of work to get something ready for you all. That the whole hope is that work that they're doing internally will feed into these board conversations. So I'm sure we can work together to come up with a plan that will keep you informed at the right intervals.
Right, and I just like to add in, and I agree with my fellow board members that communication is something that we can all be a lot more ideal with. And when I look at communication being a challenge and this being an incredibly positive initiative, I would like that communication with the board to be a priority as well. And again, reinforcing what you've said, Corey, not more work, but having regular, transparent access to the data as it's unfolding as a whole board. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I see no more questions or comments from the board. Do you have any closing remarks?
I do, which is that the last thing we'd like to do is share with you, and Dr. Asplund, I'd love for you to chime in here too. So we shared these results, this same deck, with the steering committee that is leading internally leading this strategic planning process. And then we did an exercise where we reflected on the current vision and mission in light of all of this feedback and sort of where we want to be and where we want to go as a district. And we put together some ideas around what we think a refreshed vision and mission could look like as part of this new strategic plan. And so we're going to share with you, and this is not final. This is just a very draft. We want your feedback on this, but we want to share it with you because we were excited. There was a lot of energy around it, and we're eager to hear your reflections on it as well. And thanks to Craig, who helped me put together, who didn't help me, he put together the visual representation. But once we have sort of finalized and formalized this, we'll create something even more kind of flashy that will be part of our branding, if you will, going forward. But this is where we arrived. So the new refreshed vision proposal is working as one for the success of all. And the old vision, which I should have put on here so you could see it, I'll have to pull it up. But the old vision statement here, let me pause my share while I pull up the old vision statement for you. The previous vision statement was the school district of Sarasota County places learning at the center of its activities and to enable all learners to lead productive, responsible, and healthful lives. And what drew the folks to this new statement is the fact that it's so concise and focused and open-ended in the sense that we think about the success of all, which gets to the point we made earlier about the community and the community's investment in the schools, that it's not just about students. We're really invested in the success of all people who are part of Sarasota and the Sarasota community. And we liked the idea of having, this sort of catchy phrase be something that folks can put on their mugs and their sweatshirts and really is a memorable vision statement for the district. Coinciding, and I'm going to share the mission, and then I'd love your feedback. And Superintendent, I'd love you to share anything you'd like to say. And then the mission statement that goes with it reads, Sarasota County Schools, in partnership with families in the community, inspires and empowers every student to be an innovative, lifelong learner, prepared for success in an ever-changing world. And the previous or current, I should say, mission statement is the school district of Sarasota prepares students to achieve the highest learning standards by engaging a high-quality staff, involved parents, and a supportive community. So it's a bit of a rearrangement, a lot of the same components, but an emphasis on every student, as well as innovation and ever-changing world. We felt like that was particularly relevant given the ever-changing world we're living in right now. Dr. Asplin, is there anything you'd like to add as far as the teams coming up with these two pieces?
Yes, I think, when I first arrived here and, I did my research and looked at the climate surveys and things of that nature, some of those things that you mentioned, Corey, were right on as far as, the communication piece, the us, them feeling at the school site, parents or teachers, even saying that they're not being able to provide input as much as they wish and everything else. And I think, and I'm not saying that's a terrible, terrible thing that was going on, but I just know that was something that we needed to work on right off the bat. And I know we introduced the thin book of trust, and we had the book professional development with the principals and the upper level district leaders. And I felt like, the us them factor between the district level folks and the principals, you could almost see it. And I think it had a lot to do with what was going on. COVID's there. Everybody's making a lot of decisions very quickly. And like Ms. Brown said, you're getting information out of Tallahassee too, and you're making quick decisions and passing it on. And one thing that we really have been working on, and we are definitely not there, and we need to continue to work on that, is making sure that we do collaborate, do communicate together as one, working together as one to gather information together to solve problems. And I know that's something that I know our leadership team has been doing quite well this year with our principals, and it has really flourished, I think, as we've gone through this year. However, there is definitely still a lot of work to do in that area. Also, during the first semester, I felt like, when you look at the community and the issues that we were having in the community and at some of our board meetings and so forth, things that were happening in the parking lot, and just trying to get everybody to understand that we all need to work together as one, to help all students, because we have many, many different target groups of students here in our school district. We are a public education entity. And so all of us knowing and understanding that we need to work together to do what's best for all students and meet students where they are so that they can be successful. So I think that vision statement really nails it. And I think it'll be good for us to utilize going into next year. It's also a statement that I think everyone can memorize pretty easily. But I really would love to see everyone working together for the success of each of our students. I think that's going to be very important. And then the whole equity piece ties into that as well. All students, success of all. So I think that little sentence right there really connects us with everybody, students, community, employees. And as we move through this new strategic plan, I think it's going to help us out a great deal. So I think you did a great job, Corey, talking with all the folks that you talked with and gathering this information. It was fantastic, and it really gives us a starting point as far as working together to figure out, what we're going to do. So I know from here we'll have probably 4 or 5 different goals, overarching goals that we will all share together and come up with together, and then strategies and then measurable outcomes. And I'm really looking forward to that. So, but I think this is a great start, and I appreciate all the hard work that you've done and all the hard work that our employees have done thus far. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Superintendent, I didn't know if there was any hands or desire to provide any feedback on the vision or mission, or if you want to hold that conversation for another time.
Well, I think what I was just talking about was the vision. If you want to switch over to the mission, I think the mission really goes hand in hand with the vision there and the way it's created, because it does talk about partnerships with our families and our community. That's very, very important. We need to make sure that we're doing that. And then inspiring and empowers every student, every single student, no matter what group of student you are in, target group student, every student across the board. So when we look at learning gains, every student should have learning gains. Yes, we look at the achievement gaps, and yes, we look at target groups of students, and we are working and we will be working on those. But we need to make sure that we have every student in mind, and that equity piece is involved with every student as well. To be an innovative lifelong learner, we want our students to be lifelong learners. When they leave us, no matter whether they're working in the military or going to college, we really want them to be lifelong learners so that they are prepared for what happens in the world. And as you saw this year, so many different things happen in this world. It's so ever-changing, and you have to adapt. And we need to make sure that our students are successful in that. So I think the mission statement is fantastic, and I think it aligns really well with the vision. So thank you, Corey.
Yeah, Corey, this is Chair Brown. I also like that mission statement that you've come up with. Although I'm wondering if working as one might be one color, like maybe the yellow, and for the success of all, all be yellow, because I don't think all is I really like the working as one, success of all, the two things highlighted. Yeah. It'd be, I don't know what it looks like. It might look good or not, but it's just something I'm throwing out there.
Sure, yeah, and I can give that feedback. This was sort of Craig's first crack, but he's excited to really dig into the design piece as well. And I should just clarify that this was created entirely by the superintendent and the steering committee, not me. This is their vision and mission. So I'm excited that it resonates with you.
And I think it embodies where we want to go. So I think it's very good. Yes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you all so much for your time. I'm grateful to be partnering with Dr. Esplin and the team, and excited to take all of this work that we've done so far and use it to inform the identification of those goals and strategies to really take the district from a really strong place to a place that's even stronger. So thank you all so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Great. Thank you. And you ended
care.
right on time.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Next on the agenda is the investigations presentation, and I think Jody Dumas and Al Hareda have put something together for us.
Yes,
Overview.
we've been working on the investigations process and trying to make sure that we are consistent with that and everybody understands that. And I know Mr. Dumas and Mr. Hareda and his investigators have also been working on this and will present today.
And this is just an overview. I mean, just like what we did with the mental health. If we want to delve deeper into this, you know, we can come back. But today it's just an overview of what you've put together.
Yes, thank you very much, board members, Dr. Asplin. We appreciate the opportunity for a few minutes just to update you on just one of the great things going on in our HR department. I think you're going to, over the course of the next couple of months, you're really going to see an HR department that has been working for the past year or so, has got some great new leadership in the department, and is, I think, going to amaze not only you, but all of our new prospective employees as we continue to evolve. One of the things that Al Hareda and his team have been working on, one of the initiatives was to really look at investigations in the district and to standardize across, professionalize, standardize how we did investigations, and then systematically where discipline needed to be administered, how we administered that discipline. And so about a year ago or so, Al and his team started looking at how we might do that in HR. And I would say this team has really evolved into a well-oiled machine at this point. We actually did a presentation, mostly Al and our two investigators, who Al will introduce, about 2 weeks ago to all administrators in the district, just to update them on our investigative process and some of the changes we've made recently. So that's the overview you're going to get today. So with that, let me turn it over to Al Hareda to kind of walk you through, and certainly Dr. Foster, who's taken the helm in that department and will lead us in the right direction as we move forward. So with that, Al, go ahead.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Dr. Asplin, board members, Mr. Duggan. Today, I'm just going to do a really quick overview, like Jody said, about some of the things that we've worked on in standardizing the way that we do investigations in the district. I think that Mr. Duggan would agree that standardizing the investigations is going to be very, very helpful in some of our future possible lawsuits, possible other things that come out from not conducting investigations consistently across the board, and like Jody said, having the consistent outcomes and disciplines that are appropriate to each thing that occurs. Previous to this, we did have, if you guys remember, each school or cost center, they would conduct their own investigations. And we found in some of our, lots of our past investigations that we weren't consistent across the board in given discipline and or even investigating certain situations that occurred. So I just really quick want to introduce, we are very, very lucky with the investigators that we got. Our first investigator is Mr. Rob Bonet. He's coming to it. Well, his history, he retired from the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. He was there for 21 years and is retired as a commander. And then that's Rob. And then our second investigator, Mr. Jeremiah Johnson, he was with the Wisconsin State Patrol for 15 years, 4 years as a sergeant, and he came to us right from them. So we are very, very lucky. My challenge has been to not make every investigation criminal in nature, and we've had to work with, but that also helps us work well with the partnership that we have with our Sarasota County Schools Police Department. They involve us, we involve them, so that we're doing a hand-in-hand investigation, especially if it's criminal in nature. And you probably saw in some of the flow charts that I sent to you, or that were included in the packet. We're not going to go over those, but how we work together in those criminal investigations. But then we're looking at policy, procedure, collective bargaining agreement violations, and then they're looking at the criminal aspect of that. So really quick, what we look at when we're working on an investigation is we look at what the Florida Department of Education would expect from us, what the Office of Professional Practices, and also what we are laid out in Human Resources and the Collective Bargaining Agreement and our policies and procedures. So we take all of those things and then we try to put that together while we're working a case to ensure that we're in compliance. really quick, this is more for our cost center heads and principals of how they can file a case with us. We have worked with, it was Melanie Gombos, but now Tamika Hannon, to develop a smart sheet. And with that smart sheet, what it does is the principal or cost center head can go on, they log in, just like we're kind of doing with the COVID cases. And then that sends over, they put just brief information on what it is. It sends it over to the smart sheet for us, creates a case number, also alerts the two investigators, myself, Mr. Dumas and Dr. Foster, that there's an open case, so that way we can get to, and then we call the principal or cost center head to set up investigations as need be. They can also email us, call us, and especially the one thing is if it's a safety and security concern, we're asking them to please call us immediately and not worry about the smart sheet. We can set that up later. Just since we started this process, so the first year when we had the first investigator, Mr. Bonet, we handled about 54 cases. Remembering part of the end of that school year, we weren't in school. The students were at home and staff were at home, so that really did decrease the number of cases. However, we found out that there were new cases, which we're continuing to deal with, of things happening on Zoom classrooms, and some of those that we're having to look into what the parents are hearing. We're having to deal with parents interrupting the classroom, so we're looking into some of those things as well. So the first year, what we were just looking at is big cases that could impact a school district, which is what we initially said we were going to do with the investigator position. The second year, we realized that it was a lot more, and we wanted to be consistent across the board with all of our cases. So we did hire, like I said, Jeremiah Johnson, and this year so far we have opened, closed, or pending approximately 150 cases.
You know, to go from 54 to 150 at first, you know, I might think, oh my goodness, we've got that much more. But I don't know that there's more cases out there, but I think people are more comfortable filing a complaint, because I know there was people who were afraid to file complaints before.
I would totally agree with you.
And so I think we need to.
And I think the other piece of that too is, frankly, it's being tracked, right? So at the end of the day, as a cost center head in the past, I would be in facilities. I would handle the investigation. I would issue the discipline. That'd all be under the radar, and HR wouldn't know anything about it. Now that's all coming into the fold. We're tracking all that so we can see trends and kind of what's going on in the district. So I think some of it is just being right up front with how many cases are going on, and it's going into one spot.
And I think that's something that the board was wanting to, and we were setting up the procedures for the harassment complaints. We want to see a file. We want to see, you know, something that we can look at. Thank you.
Correct. You are correct. That was exactly what we were asked to do. So our goals are to acquire clean evidence to support the facts. One of the things that we found in working with our lawyers is sometimes when our principals or our cost center heads, they're trying to make sure everybody's safe and get in there, sometimes we don't always collect the same evidence every single time. Maybe we forgot to, as you guys recently, there were some allegations that we didn't store a video, or we didn't pull the right video or pull the right documents. Now with two investigators, we're being pretty consistent on what we're pulling, asking for from safety and security, and collecting for each incident, especially really utilizing the cameras in our schools to see different angles of, and which we weren't using as much in the past. One of the things that has really helped us with this process as well is that the investigators are not from the school sites. They're not from the cost center sites. So they're going in looking at policy, procedure, collective bargaining agreement violations. They don't have a relationship per se or, with that employee to be able to say, well, I know that employee, they wouldn't do that. There's none of that there. It's totally objective for them to go in. So that's the next thing is objectivity with them. They're, like I said, they are able to go in, and be objective when they're looking at the facts, when they're looking at the conditions and what exactly happened, who was involved, and they can be impartial. They also, I should have said this at the beginning, they are not in charge or have any hands in determining if there's discipline in the case. They are reporting to me strictly the facts of what they determined. And then I am working with the cost center heads to determine if there's any level of discipline that is required for that situation. So we want them to be comprehensive, we want them to be in-depth, and we want them to be fact-finding. And like I said at the beginning, that's really where working with the school police has been very, very helpful. Of course, we do the same thing that we've always done. If the police are involved or if DCF are involved, we kind of back off a little bit and let them do their initial safety and security threat assessments. But like I said, the partnership has been great with them sharing the information with us once they've gotten that. We also are able to sit in and on some of their interviews with students instead of the student being interviewed several different times about the same incident. So it kind of collectively, we get the same information at the same time. So that's been very, very helpful for us in this process. We also, one of the things that Rob and Jeremiah have done is prior to them coming on, we had not had the best relationship. I don't want to say relationship, but getting feedback from the Department of Children and Family in a timely manner. Because they would be working their case, and they have up to 45 days. So sometimes we would have people pulled for that long, just waiting to see where they were going with the case. Now, Rob and Jeremiah have developed relationships with the Department of Children and Families. We can call them to see where we are with a case. They give us copies of their reports in a timely manner so we can utilize those in determining our course of action. And we're getting people back to work if that's what needs to happen quicker because of those relationships that they've built. So that's been pretty awesome. So this is just, we're talking, one of the other things that Jody and Allison are really trying to, you hit this a little bit in our last presentation about professional development. We are also utilizing the Safe Schools platform to not just give people discipline, but in order to give people professional development in certain areas. So that is as an outcome of an investigation, we are recommending specific trainings for them to do in the Safe Schools platform, and then we are putting that in with the packet of the closed file so that they can get the additional support. These are just some of the things that we are handling. Like I had mentioned, we are taking almost everything off of the cost center heads except for mostly like tardies, some classroom management, some not writing lesson plans. But other than that, for the most part, we are opening up the investigations on anything else involving the employees. The schools are still handling student on student. And as far as the Title IX piece, they are handling those. They have a designated officer, assistant principal usually. I think. Sorry about that. Some of the Title IXs, but we are, after they've conducted those investigations, they are consulting with us, and then they are sending those to us so that they are all in one area, as you had spoken about earlier, Mrs. Brown, so that everything is right there and we can see the outcome. One of the first things that we do when we're talking to the principal or assistant principal, whoever calls us, is to ensure the safety of everybody, the staff and the students, depending on what's going on. We have been pretty proactive at initially moving the student, moving the teacher, or moving the staff as much as we can, just until we can get our hands in there, and then figuring out the transition if they go back in or if they need to be continue to be separated. And one of the big things that we are, our hashtag and what we're trying to promote is to take every single situation seriously. It can't be, as I said at the beginning, well, I know that person, they wouldn't do that, because we all know that if there's something there, if they're talking about it, something's there. It may not be as serious as they initially thought. However, we want to make sure that we're doing the investigation so that we can capture everything. So this is just the confidentiality clauses outlined in state statute. One of the things that we do inform anybody who's involved in an investigation is to please let us work the investigation. Don't, just because we interviewed you, please don't go talk to somebody else about the situation, because we want to get their initial interview and know what they and for them to tell us exactly what they saw, not what somebody told me they saw, or basically taint their interview. So we inform them that this is confidential in nature. Please don't talk to anybody else about it. And they've been pretty perceptive of that. We've not had a whole lot of, usually what happens is us getting there to, before it's talked about. That's one of the things, but we do try to get there in the same day. We at least make contact with the principal or cost center head in that same day. We did start a process recently because we did have a couple of situations where we interviewed some kids, and we hadn't informed the staff member that we were conducting an investigation, and the staff member was a little upset because the kids said, "I just got interviewed by the police about you." So we created a form, worked with Jody, and we created a form that just to notify them that there is a current open investigation, and at this time, we're just going to be talking to any witnesses, and that they do, and notifies them that they do have the right to contact their SCTA or their legal representative if they choose. So these are the different flow charts that we sent to you guys. We don't need to go all the way through them. So the only thing that are different is mostly when we involve law enforcement or when we involve DCF, that's where they change up just a little bit. But we tried to do the flow charts so that they were easy for our principals and our cost center heads to follow. We also put it in words so that they can follow as well. Like I talked about a little bit, I got kind of ahead of myself, is, we make sure when we go in, we retain all the footage that we can. Any social media, text messages, anything like that may support what is going on. And then, like I said, we continue to cooperate with the Department of Children and Families and law enforcement. One of the things so usually the SROs, if it is possibly criminal in nature, they're usually there first because they're at the school. So we will make contact with them. And like I said, lots of times they'll wait for us to get there so that we can be part of the interview, so that we only have to interview one time. One of the things that we always remind people is that we're all mandated reporters, that we must report child abuse to the child abuse hotline. It's not, one of the things that we always say, it's not about reporting it to your principal or your cost center head. It's about making sure that you have an obligation to report that yourself. We would like for you to tell your cost center head or principal that you did make that call or that contact, but it is their responsibility to make that contact. And then our contact information. One of the things that I think with this whole process is we have been getting a lot of great feedback from our principals, especially saying about how nice it is not to have the pressure of doing the investigations and making those decisions. And then the next day they got to have, donut day with that teacher or something. So they have been very, very, we've gotten a lot of nice accolades and some feedback for changing those processes for them.
I was just gonna.
I think you're on.
I was just gonna piggyback on that because I started.
Is your mic on?
Push.
Okay. So I was obviously a principal in the principal role when the whole process was started. And I remember sitting in the principal meeting, kind of hearing about it. And I know we had a lot of questions. So it's been neat to see it all evolve. And so I was still in the principal role when Al presented to us a couple weeks ago. And it's just been great to see where we are today and how hard the team has worked. And I know from being in the principal role or being an assistant principal, it is a huge pressure to take off. Let the school-based administrators focus on student achievement and let us in HR focus on the investigation. So and I also think we can see trends across the district. If we're seeing a pattern of certain things happening at multiple school sites, it allows us to then offer that training that's necessary.
Thank you. Well, this is all very encouraging. This has been an area of passion for me. So there are a couple areas I'm encouraged to see. I know that Al, we've talked about almost having, for lack of a better term, like an internal affairs, and I feel like that structure has been put in place. So it's just gathering information and then providing it then for that to be followed up. One thing that I think is so critical is the process being very explicitly defined. And sometimes you can't, arrange for every scenario, but particularly with the flow charts, I love them. I love charts and flow charts, but there are some nuances. And so in there, having explicitly, for example, let's just use law enforcement or DCF, when there is that lag of time, making sure it's explicitly listed out that we document that there is a lag of time. Is that in the protocols? That, for example, if DCF is contacted or it's a law enforcement investigation, so the time frame would now change. I want to make sure staff understands that because when we reflect on it, those things, the compliance, dotting I's, crossing T's are so paramount. So is that included in the process to make sure that that's explicitly listed? Hey, if DCF's involved, law enforcement's involved, we have to stand down for X amount of time. I understand they have a relationship so they can fast track some things. That's great. But making sure we're documenting it on our end. Is that listed out?
Yeah, so one of the things that we also do, so this process is going on, but behind the scenes, normally this is a Tuesday, we have a case review on Tuesday. Okay. So that's a big team of people, and actually Patrick's going to start sitting in on the case review too, because he brings some expertise to the table, right? So again, the other thing is we're always learning, always getting better at this process, and so Patrick's going to bring to the table some additional things that we want to incorporate. But we review every case every week, and so at the end of the day, when there's a delay for something going on, we're all talking about what that looks like, what we're going to do to respond, and then we have a protocol in place that our two investigators or Al will feed back to that principal all the current situation, kind of what's going on. So every 2 weeks at a minimum, they're giving a constant feedback of here's where we are with the case. So I think from a team perspective, we're looking at that weekly and making those adjustments as we need to and making sure we're, as much as we can, trying to communicate out current status, if there's something holding the investigation up or where we are and what we're waiting on.
Right. And and I know Patrick and I have talked about this pretty extensively. So just even from the complaint, like even those things, just having something in a form, in a file that just shows, hey, at X date, talk to so-and-so. Doesn't need to be a whole memorandum. But I think, again, when you go back to when things go sideways, we can always point to, we followed this process and it's explicitly listed out. The final thing, and I'm going to be cognizant of time and I can go offline on a lot of these things, but is the training. One of the biggest things is we have these in place. I know we're training staff, and I know that was part of the Kroll piece of it. Administrators, but making sure staff fully understands that, and also families, because I think there's a component with their students. How are we integrating that, especially at the beginning of a school year? I think it's a great opportunity. Can you talk to me about that?
So this was our first stab at a formal training with the principals. I haven't completely, to be honest, thought about using this at the beginning of school, but it probably would align right with our current equity policy and procedures that's mandatory for that we go over at the beginning of the school, that we would be able to tie a piece of this in to that, because that is attended by all of the teachers and staff members coming back to the schools. So we could hit them there with a brief, this is how you report any kind of problems that you may have. Right now, our teachers usually are reporting it to their assistant principals or principals, and then the assistant principal or principal is starting the smart sheet reporting.
I will have to say, and I'd be remiss if I'd hate myself after the fact if I didn't lay this out. As we talk about gaps in the district, that's certainly one of the things. Training and development is a gap in the district. It has been for a while, and that's certainly we're trying. Alice and I talk every day about how do we create that capacity to make sure that training and development is there. What are the ongoing things every year when employees come back? What do they need in place? Right now, that is on Al Hareda, and certainly he's got a bunch of things that he's trying to juggle. So that is certainly, though, as we continue to look at HR and how that evolves, training and development is a gap, and we have to address it to make sure we get where you want to go, and to make sure we've got the right training in place everywhere, ongoing every year. And then coming out of Weingarten's, what are the options for training? A Weingarten and an investigation doesn't mean it has to be discipline. Maybe there's some professional development. Well, in order for that to be effective, you've got to have the right professional development at the right time, and you can't rely on the cost center head to do that. We've got to be able to provide that out of HR to say, here's the investigation, here's what we think this person needs, and here's the option to do that. So all of that is great. It's just we got to develop all of that and make sure that training is relevant. So right now that's falling on Al, but that's certainly a gap we're going to have to look at in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Karen?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dumas, you stated that legal counsel is starting to join your regular meetings to review the investigations. I just would like to get clarification that legal counsel has reviewed the processes and procedures that are all in place right now to date.
I think we're starting to learn as we go, right? So there are a lot of things. I'll let Patrick certainly jump in from his perspective. But certainly, you know, as he's got some investigations coming in front of him, as the grievances fall to his lane to kind of go through and respond to the SCTA, certainly he is diving into those processes. But just last week, as we were talking about a case that had been kind of ongoing for a couple of years, one of the things that Mr. Dugan brought to the table is, you know, kind of a cover sheet on our package that says, hey, here's what's been going on in the past. And so I think there's some retooling we still can continue to do to make sure we're in the right spot, but I'll let Patrick respond to more of that.
I will say this is a step in the right direction. I am pleased to review this. I think there's a lot of best practices here. I look forward to working with you guys, and I have a couple ideas obviously we can discuss offline. You know, I think there's always room for more training so that people are making sure they get things to you. I think to some degree, you're only as good as what you know about, and so setting a culture of accountability and setting a culture of communication, which has been a theme today, and making sure people are trained to know, you know, to get things to you and what needs to go to you so that you can act in your specialized professional way. So I think is crucial to this. I have a few other ideas, but I'm very encouraged by this, frankly. This is the first I have seen it all in one place. And like I said, I think this is a really good start. I've been using some things I've been looking at as a way to kind of look under the curtain, and many of those thus far predate all of this. So I think the things I'm seeing in this PowerPoint here are sufficient to address many of the things that I have seen that I would change. And I look forward to working to, you know, mastering this and getting this, you know, perfect so that we can move forward and everybody can be set up for success in the district.
One thing I have a question about is how is the file put together? I mean, are all of these things are written out and then passed around and then things get lost in a file or someone takes something out of a file? Is there something that is input into a computer file that stays with this employee that people add onto it that won't get lost or that won't get pulled from a file?
So Al alluded to Smartsheet in his presentation. We're using the Smartsheet program in the district to do all of that. And so that, I think, was one of the issues we've had in the past is what was going on with this investigation. Where is it? Where's the documentation? So, you know, each investigation gets a case number so we can track back to that case number. And then all the associated, whether there's a video, the reports, the issue discipline all gets tagged to that file in Smartsheet. And so we can go back to that at a later date. So I feel like we've been able to address the issues of not having everything in one place.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Tom?
This is great. This goes back to the conversation that I think we had at the last board meeting about making investments into HR to see these improvements. I encourage that Mr. Dugan be part of as many of those conversations as possible on the front end so that you're establishing best practice and process right from the get-go. Coming from the Northeast, I will tell you that part of the approach here is a new adoption of mentality. And mentality means that if you're starting an investigation, assume the worst. You're going to get sued. And if you assume that, then you're going to make sure that, to Mrs. Ziegler's point, that every possible piece of paper, communication, everything is in that file to prevent, and that's why we would want Patrick to be part of that proactive front end, that we have buttoned everything up and we are ready to go to war if we have to. In most cases, we don't have to, but we need to be prepared for that eventuality.
I just wanted to touch on going back to what Bridget had shared about the training, because I think this relates to it. I think you bring up a good point about training everyone. I think a lot of times we train people when they're in it. So that means there's been an accusation made, then they get a crash course in it. But I think training the entire district is helpful, because I think not only those that end up being involved, but for the whole district to know that we have processes and that we are making sure that everything is being, carefully and thoroughly investigated when there's a concern. So, and I think that then also touches on what you're sharing. So,
Thank you. Jane?
Well, in the past, we've had some problems in this area, and as small a detail as time stamping and date and other things that, any lapse in some of these investigations need to be so noted. But as far as this goes, I think, and perhaps it needs to be noted in our union contract, if something doesn't go well and people don't abide by this and these trainings that we're talking about, they need to go. Because we cannot have the liability to our staff and our students from anything in this arena that is not handled properly. I mean, it's the bare basic bones of our culture, isn't it? So we really need to make sure that everyone is trained on a continuing basis and understands the dead seriousness of this. Because, how many people don't feel they have a voice, and how many people have had issues that they've not brought to the table? As we said, it's a big increase this last year because they didn't feel like they were being heard. And perhaps they have had some very serious situations exist. So I'm thankful that Patrick has had the experience he's had. And I think all of us working together that this is a new day. But I think we have to look at this. I think we have to look at the union contract and not dragging our feet on some of these things, because this is not a place that we or anyone else can drag our feet, because, if something happens in this arena, we need to take actions quickly.
Thank you. Bridget?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I know we didn't adopt it yet, but working as one for the success of all. I mean, if we have to really, if that's what we go for, that means at every facet of our operation. And so, to me, where we look at lessons learned in the past, we talk about what's a priority, and I believe this board's spoken clearly with the investment at Kroll, with the investment in the HR department, and moving forward, that this is not something that can wait. And so, going back to, I understand it takes time to develop it, so you want it to be effective, but when you do think of like onboarding at the beginning of the year, you have all the employees, every single person plays a role in it, because it's not only from a defensive strategy from a litigation, it's proactive that people already knows, to your point, that we have processes in place. And so it just holds people, it lifts that standard up immediately because they just know that that's going to be followed, and that accountability is being taken seriously, to Mrs. Goodwin's point. And that we can't afford, because that's money taken away from the classrooms at the end of the day when there's unforced errors. So that, and we're not going down that road. There is one other question, and I think that should be a required sign-off if we do it virtually. I know there are companies that do it, whether we make it ourselves. We have to analyze the cost-benefit to it. I mean, the time to make one may be too robust, but then we have a virtual sign-off at every year, and it just indicates to all employees at every single level. It's a very similar to see something, say something, in that same cultural component. The one other question I have, and then I'll stop, but there was a couple different things that I know that this was employee to employee and then student to employee. One thing here on, I don't have a page number, but it's under complaints, and it says Title IX, and that's employee to employee. Do we have, is there anything from a complaint standpoint for Title IX when it's employee or student based? And it just says employee to employee, so I didn't know if there was a different process when it's Title IX when it's a student related. And then the final question was, and this was posed to me, as it pertains to 504, I know we have a committee, I think, at the school district that does 504 complaints. Or do we contract with DOA? And that may be, I want clarification on that, if this falls into this realm from complaints.
So the first part of your question is we, for the Title IX, that is outlined in the documents that we had drawn up by Krell. So that's where that policy would refer back, or that policy would be utilized in doing those situations. So that's students' right. So that's not on there. And I'm not sure about the 504, to be honest. I don't know if anybody else is.
So I think 504 would fall under ESE department, but I'm not 100% sure, so I don't want to speak to it because I just don't know.
Okay, I just think, Mr. Harita, I think in the past that was something that fell under you for 504. I could be incorrect, but I just
not 504. I in the past and currently still I deal with ADA, but not the 504 portion for students.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll certainly circle back to all of that and make sure we have that in place.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you very much. for your presentation, and board members, if you have any other questions, please contact Mr. Harita or Ms. Foster or Ms. Dumas. Thank you. Next up, we have the SCT and the Fire Science Academy building. And thank you also for the investigators coming. It's nice to see your face. You sure look professional.
Yes, thank you to HR. I know that Dr. Foster wasn't here the other day. She was ill, and so I wanted to just say she is our new Executive Director of Human Resources. She's doing a great job, and we're meeting frequently as a group and working on our entire HR department. So thank you very much, Allison, for that. Next, we have our fire item, fire science, and Mr. Dumas just wanted to give you another update on that.
So thank you. So this will be a quick update. Just wanted to give you, kind of let you know exactly where we are. So the conversations previously have been regarding our Fire Science Training Academy in our site that we currently lease from the city, transitioning potentially to a new training facility in partnership with the county, a centralized training facility over off of Knights Trail, centralized to the county. We had the conversation about part of our development with the 5-year capital plan is that we would need a line item in that budget this year. If we wanted to partner with them, they are going to tentatively break ground in November for that project. So this was kind of being fast-tracked. I asked Ron DePillo and his team to kind of meet with the county and talk about what that logistics might might look like in terms of partnering with the county. And so I just wanted to have Ron, I don't think we're anywhere near where we can make a recommendation yet, but I wanted to give Ron the opportunity to update you on those conversations.
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing us to speak, board members. Chuck Joseph is the coordinator of our fire academy at the academy currently, and he's here to answer any specific questions. But since the last time we were before you, we took some time and developed a kind of a specification list of required spaces to be a certified academy in the state of Florida. So we went back and forth with the state, did some conversation about what we currently have, did an itemized list of educational spaces for instruction and administration. We also did what we need for out parcels like burn pits and type of burn and smoke towers, facility improvements like what kind of hydrants we would need and water specifications, power, computer labs, things of that nature, and parking. So we did a preliminary specification and worked that out, but then came the conversation that we're going to have hopefully next week, is that what part of this would be duplicate services that the county's already planned for. So what we want to do is not have duplicated types of investments or facilities, and we want to go through and say with the county, here's what we need, where can we eliminate duplicated facilities. So there's no sense in us having classroom space and them having classroom space if we're not using it at the same time. That could be considered a shared resource and then add value to our contribution to the project. So I think what we've come to a conclusion is that here's the list of things that we need. Our next meeting with the county, it's upcoming, will say, yes, we need you to build that. Yes, we need the county to build that, and here's what we can share. And I think we'll have that hammered out pretty quickly next week. And then, of course, the logistics of the agreement itself in terms of our buildings, our facilities on county property versus on school board property.
So in terms of next steps, we've got another conversation, as Ron said, with his team and with the county to kind of say, okay, these are all the things we would need as a fire training academy. Now, what are you going to build and where can we partner on that to get our scope to something that's realistic that we can bring before you? You would then see that as part of your 5-year plan. We presented you a tentative 5-year plan. We would bring it to you as a line item for this next year in that 5-year plan, and probably invite Ron back to talk about with his team what we decided we needed to build and what we're going to share with the county and how all that kind of plays out. If indeed you said move forward with this option, it would be in our 5-year plan that you voted on, and then we would be actually hammering out the agreement, which would come in before you in terms of how does all this operate, how does it relate, how do we relate with the county on the site. So a bunch of steps to go, but as a type timeline, and we just wanted to keep you up to date on kind of where we are and working with them on this potential project.
Well, again, I'm excited about the possibilities, but what are the costs? What's expected of us? Parking for 100 cars I mean, we're looking at student parking. I mean, what else are we, I mean, we won't have 100 students. I mean, do we?
We have 145 apprentices alone, and then we have
Really?
Yes, and then with 5 classrooms, we would need upwards of 20 per classroom. So we calculated 100, but that parking lot, of course, would be multi-purpose in addition to that.
Good.
But we have to come up with a number from somewhere, and that's how we came up with that number. It was trying to play it out.
I'm surprised we have that. I've been to the graduations, but I guess you've got several classes and things going on at once. Okay.
That's correct. Yes, we have a lot of continuing education that really doesn't count towards any of those, but does take up space, and it allows us to offer our instructors opportunities to get in front of students. And it's a benefit to the county, of course, when we offer those continuing education courses.
Okay. Thank you. Jane?
Yep.
Well, I know that technology is evolving and changing, and I also know that if there's any way that we can do this, I am really in support of it, because I think we really need to be in this environment. I think we need to upgrade our facilities. This is a growing, thriving part of STC. And from what I know, this would really give us quite a leg up. There are a couple of other school districts now that are looking at doing this across the state. And, we really need to have that in an accessible area where we can do all those things that we need to do. The current area is probably not going to happen. Because we're too much inside the city now, which we were not when we originally started this. So this is the perfect time to make the decision, because we won't have any conflicts in terms of duplication of effort, shall we say, with the county and with us. And I think it's a great way to partner, and I really like partnerships. And I think if there's any way that we can make this work, Ron, Jody, please, let's go forward.
Tom?
I agree with what Jane said, and from our last conversation, it sounds, that we're up against the wall to make changes anyhow and to make some improvements, and so this does sound like the perfect time. The only thing that I would ask is, as you go through some of your meetings, if you could just give some ballpark numbers, some ballpark information to all school board email, just so that we're not hit at the last minute for a presentation, that we have some information along the way so that when we meet again, we have a little bit more of a foundation. That would be greatly appreciated.
Karen?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and wholeheartedly agree. Mr. Edwards being ahead of it as much as possible is ideal, and I just wanted to say that I'm excited about what's to come, and these kinds of partnerships for me are a win-win for community, for us, and look forward to your future endeavors. And
thank you.
Yep. It's a good chance for us to leverage resources and kind of build synergy between the two organizations. Absolutely.
Thank you. And we are keeping on schedule. Next, our fourth item is student vaccinations and face masks. And I know that Michael Drennan has been patiently waiting in the wings to join us. Jody?
Yes, Michael, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
There you are. And Mr. Dumas.
So thank you very much. And Michael, thank you very much for joining us from the health department. So the reason this is on here today is to have a conversation about vaccinations at school sites. And Michael, certainly you can jump in here, but we've been approached by the health department. They would like to partner with us to offer opportunities for make it convenient for parents, where they would elect to have their child vaccinated. We've got a lot of sites, obviously, and so where we could partner with the health department to offer those shots conveniently for parents. They approached us a couple weeks ago, I think following our last board meeting, with the opportunity and wanted to bring that before you today to kind of discuss if the board would be comfortable in that partnership and what would those parameters be. So that's really the conversation for today. So Michael, have you guys thought a little bit about what those partnerships might look like, and maybe you could describe that to the board?
Sure. So I think, in an ideal situation, obviously there's some logistic pieces that we would need to work out. We'd be able to offer vaccines at maybe 3 different locations touching on North, Middle, and South County. Some of the logistics issues that we just need to think about as we get closer to the end of the school year. Becomes difficult to make sure we get both doses. It would be really, if we did it this week, we'd be just right on the edge of that 3-week mark to get the second dose. So that's one piece we have to figure out. And the other piece would be staffing components. But we definitely want to make sure that all students have the opportunity to get vaccinated in a convenient manner. We had a really good turnout this last Saturday at our mall location. Just over, I think, just over 820 students were vaccinated. And we're doing that again this coming up Saturday. But we just, like as I said earlier, we want to make sure it's convenient. I think it's just a logistics piece that we have to make sure, and Jody and I may have to have some conversation offline on how we make all that work out, assuming the board is amenable to that and we're able to get all the everything put together.
Well, Michael, I think that's wonderful that we've got students coming to the mall site, and I know that students are coming to the drugstores. Walgreens. There were several that came, but is there a problem with the correct vaccine that they have to have? They can only get the Pfizer one, and how do the parents find out where that Pfizer is, and do you have enough of the Pfizer? And again, if they go to the school and get one, and then school is out, is it going to be complicated to get the other? But I would think for North County and even Central County, I think that the mall is pretty convenient. Or are we talking about North County up in the Newtown area that we're not getting those students?
I don't know that it's necessarily that we're not getting those students. I think it would be, the thought process was how do we make it as convenient as possible? I agree. I think the mall is a good location, but that may not be the best location for everyone. And of course, if we provided the first dose vaccine at a school site, we'd definitely follow up and make sure we were able to provide the second dose of that Pfizer. Getting that vaccine for us, at least at this time, isn't too terribly difficult. The problem remains its cold storage demands, and we've been able to work with the state regional team to manage some of that for us. And so we're looking at, maybe purchasing a freezer ourselves that can meet that demand, the -70 demand. The other piece that we're also thinking about is, as we move throughout the summer, the expectation is that the Pfizer and potentially even Moderna vaccine will be available for younger children less than the age of 12, and so that we would offer those vaccines at our normal health department locations as part of our immunization clinic. So whether or not that would be our Ringling location or our location in Northport, those are just things that we're thinking about, because as I said, our expectation is those ages will continue to drop as the manufacturers continue their studies and ask for permission on, I believe the next group would probably be 5 years and older. I haven't heard any time when that request would go to the FDA, but I believe that's the next would be 5 to 11-year-olds.
And you think that'll happen sometime in the summer?
I would expect it to. Yes, I think it will happen sometime this summer. When, I don't know. But, that's our hope, and that's kind of what we've heard.
Thank you. Bridget?
Thank you for being here, and thank you for bringing this back.
Use your mic, please.
What?
I wasn't hearing. Okay, there you go.
So I was just saying thank you for bringing this back, as I had stressed that I didn't, and I know that there was rumors out there, and so we are squashing that wasn't taking place, and that we would not do that until we had a conversation as a board about providing this at any school sites. So first, right now, how many facility sites does the Department of Health for Sarasota provide vaccines? How many vaccine sites exist right now for DOH?
Currently, we just have the one site at the mall.
Okay.
And for the foreseeable future, we'll continue to have that location. At this time, we're able to provide Pfizer on on the weekend. We'd be able to do that on Saturdays. And so this, like I said, this previous Saturday was very successful vaccination clinic. We're hoping to see the same thing this upcoming Saturday. But right now, that's the only permanent location. We do have some pop-up locations that we've done partnering with different businesses and different churches in the community, but that site is the current only permanent site.
And that's open Monday through what?
It's Monday through Saturday.
Okay, and then you do the weekends at a higher level or something? You have to do the last weekend, you said you had a lot?
Yeah, so, that was primarily driven by, parents and with their children 12 and over this last Saturday. To be honest, the vaccine clinic, the demand has been decreasing over the last, several weeks. So we're probably doing, any given day, probably doing about 400 vaccines. And that's a combination of second dose and first dose, Moderna. And then, like I said, this last Saturday was the Pfizer clinic that we had. And we did, I think total was 970 with about 820 being 12 to 17-year-olds.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just to clarify, if we're talking about school sites, and so I'll say for the record, I agree that if we can find a way to make it easily accessible for people who want it, that I'm all for that. I think it's just balancing out the compliance side of it, and then operationally. So if we were doing a north, central, and south on a school site, we're talking on an off-school day, off-school hours. Can you clarify what the thought process is around that?
Yeah, Jody can probably speak to that some, but Jody and I had some conversation earlier this week. I think it would be either an off-school day or off-school hours, trying to pick a time that would be convenient for parents to get there. And I think, but definitely not during the school day. Just the potential disruption there, I would imagine, would just be not beneficial to what we're trying to achieve.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the smart thing for us to do is, if you agreed that we would move ahead in this direction, is to obviously we work with the principal and the site and make sure we got the right site and all the timing and stuff. But at the end of the day, if we did something after hours, after school get out, so let's just say we picked a high school, they're an early out. We could let the kids get out. We make sure we pick a day we don't have a lot of events going on. Make sure we get our staff in, set up, and then as other schools get out for dismissal time, parents in pickup line could then run over to this particular high school and get through the vaccination process. So that's one option. The other option is looking at a Saturday or a Sunday or something like that. So again, looking for direction, but we certainly probably could make, again, working with the principal to make sure the schedule worked, we probably could make after hours and the weekends work if we needed to, based on the staffing.
And we need to reiterate, we will not go in the school and vaccinate the kids. The parents have to bring the student to us. We will not vaccinate without a parent present.
No, no way. Definitely would not vaccinate without a parent present.
So and I'll wrap up very quickly. So to that point, doing it off, trying to find the optimal time. If you say a high school, the early release, but parents who are working, that may not make sense. If we're going to do it, I'd like it to be on a weekend, just from an effective standpoint and lack of disruption. But finally, is as far as students or families that come, can you just confirm, my understanding is they have to be present for Sarasota County Health Department to issue the vaccine, and they have to sign the waiver. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a permission slip, or it's not called a waiver form. It's the vaccine consent form. And yes, the parent would have to sign for a minor, and they would have to be present with that child.
Okay, because I heard reports of another county neighboring us that they didn't require them to be present. And then final question is, this would be run and managed by the Department of Health, or would it require school board employees?
Well, I think that's part of the logistics piece we'd have to figure out. Most likely managed by the Department of Health, but the staffing piece is one of the things we're going to have to figure out. Probably not administered by school board staff, but we may look for some logistical support, just depending on what the traffic may be. Like I said, there's a lot of those logistic pieces we want to figure out.
Yeah, I don't think we need to micromanage what they're doing. I think Mr. Dumas and Susie DeBose and the health department, they handled the employees, And I think they can handle, what they're doing. We're just changing locations and opening it up for when younger children are getting vaccinated. And what they need to know is, we won't be here all summer. And these things are, as we know with the masks, they're changing every day. So we need to, give them some direction. And I think I would like to see them, if we can help the health department administer vaccines to children, I want to be able to let our staff help as much as they can. Tom?
Some feedback. I'm all for trying to make it as convenient as possible for our young students to be vaccinated. But I have heard that there are students that would like to receive it, but are postponing because they're afraid of side effects during testing. So, in terms of setting up your classes or your actual vaccination sites, I'd like you to take that into consideration as well. And if you wouldn't mind, and I'm all for whatever we can do to make it convenient for our parents to get them there and have it done. Can you also, just for public purposes, state our quarantine policy as it relates to vaccination?
Sure. So I think that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up. So any individual, student or teacher or other staff member that is completely vaccinated. So that means they have, with Moderna or Pfizer, they've had both doses, or with the Johnson & Johnson, the single dose. And it has been 14 days since they've completed that series. There will be no need to quarantine as long as they remain asymptomatic. And so if an exposure occurs, an individual who has completed the series would not need to quarantine.
Thank you.
Jane?
You're very welcome.
Well, I want to thank you for all the hard work and the diligent effort the health department has put in this year, Michael, because I know it's been tough. And it's been tough on everybody, but mostly we're talking about middle and high school students, correct? So take, for example, in Northport, we have a high school and 2 middle schools. So I think that we look around those areas and see what's convenient, and we make sure that we reach out to mom and dad. And, the no quarantine issue is good. And also, at some point in time, it may be the no mask issue that's good as well. But in any event, I just hope that we can do this before school's out and get going with this, because I think it's so important that we get everyone vaccinated. That is the mantra that I'm hearing, and I'm amazed at how many people are still frightened to get a vaccine, and I'm just hoping that we can get more of our students in.
Well, I will say too that I can completely appreciate that people want to make sure they make the right decision, and whether or not they come to the vaccination site and just ask questions. We've answered lots of questions at the vaccine site, or give us a call at the health department. More than happy to answer any questions. Obviously not going to alleviate everyone's fears, but to your point, the more people we get vaccinated, the better it is.
Thank you. Ms. Drennan, could you also, face masks have become a big issue this past week. Could you give us an overview of what the CDC has updated regarding the face mask, and have they come up with new protocols for schools yet?
So I brought that up right before I logged on. So there's been a lot of changes to the masking policy this last week, or masking recommendations, I should say. At this time, the CDC blanket statement has been for masking to stay in place in the school setting. And one of the reasons I believe that they've made that statement is that population, for the vast majority of them being students, haven't had an opportunity to be vaccinated or completed that vaccine series. So the masking recommendations for the general public have been, if someone has completed the vaccine series, then it is okay for them in most situations to be out in public and around other individuals without a mask, assuming it's been 14 days since they completed that series. In the school setting, we know that the vast majority of our students haven't had the opportunity to receive the first dose, much less both doses plus 14 days. And so that's why that guidance from a public health standpoint has remained that students continue to wear masks in the school setting.
What about adults in the school setting, like teachers?
So their guidance pretty much is just, kind of lumps students and teachers into one group. So I think that's what, I think the thought process there is just not to change the recommendations until the end of the school year. We've almost got to that point. The chance for exposure from a student to a teacher, while small, still exists. But teachers would be included in that recommendation to still wear masks, at least for this time in the school setting.
So you're saying that it's saying that teachers, even if they're vaccinated,
even if completed in 14 days, should still wear a mask. So obviously
should still wear a mask in school with students.
With students, yep. Even though the risk is extremely low, from a public health standpoint, the potential for exposure, while low, even from a student would exist, and we wouldn't want that opportunity to be introduced. I know it's not necessarily confusing, but doesn't quite line up with what they've made for the general public. I think they just want to make sure in the school setting, everyone's as safe as possible at this time.
And for adults who aren't in schools, like in the admin buildings?
Right, that would be, in that situation, would be fine to not wear a mask.
Thank you.
Unless, of course, the caveat to that and the CDC's recommendation is unless that's policy for that agency. So as long as it's your policy that staff wear masks in administrative buildings, then that would be the recommendation you go for. If you change that policy, then that would change that recommendation.
Thank you. With those comments, does anybody else want to comment about our mask policy? I know that there's definitely concerns, especially for children, or confusion, because we're still hearing people, we don't want our students to wear masks, but we're hearing from the CDC, even with these new guidelines, that students and staff in schools should still be wearing masks. Jane?
Well, I, for one, understanding that, will continue to wear a mask. I've been vaccinated, and in all settings I will continue to wear a mask because if our students are going to, and it's something that that we're doing this year in schools, then I as well will continue to wear a mask. I think that we're talking about maybe outside on the playground and what could we do there, and the problem that we have is we have such a short period of time and people get confused. A couple of months ago, I mentioned here at this meeting that my granddaughter, who happens to be 16 and a student at Pineview, was getting her first vaccination at a Walgreens in Inglewood. I don't know if anybody remembered what I said, but I got calls from the principal of Pineview saying that he had received a lot of calls from parents saying, when are you giving the vaccine at Pineview? Which was never, ever mentioned to do that, but she had taken it upon herself to get the vaccine. So I know that there are lots of difficult times in keeping things straight in communication. So from communications itself and the fact of what the CDC has said to us, along with the health department, I'm in favor of leaving our policy as it is till the end of the year, and then we can change it to however we'd like to the 1st of July. But I do not, for me, feel that we should make any changes to that policy at this time.
Bridget?
Thank you, and thank you, Michael, for your update. Not that you're responsible for the CDC's statements, but I do think they play a very substantial role into confusion and hesitancy, quite frankly, because it's almost as if they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. But with that said, this policy-making board has to take that and make the best decisions. I know I mentioned, and this will be no surprise to anyone in this room, But that, I want to see masks be optional as soon as possible. One of the things is I recognize that we're at the very end of the year, and I think Mrs. Godwin makes a good point of the confusion of communication. I think everything can be achieved with proper communication, but I'm not diminishing the kind of havoc that would actually create. Then the question is the cost benefit worth it? My opinion is yes, but that may not be shared on the board. But the other part to this conversation is whether or not we can do that, because to me, we have probably, as all board members, have received an outpour of a lot of people wanting to get rid of masks right away. I also know that there are a lot of people who a handful have reached out saying that they want to keep it for the end of the year. So I want to make sure that I'm not citing only one side. But that, initially the conversation was, we really can't, and I put myself in this position from a process standpoint of, well, you have to advertise for 30 days, and by that point, it's going to be, we're at the point of it sunsetting. So those are procedural relevant, but things that, quite frankly, the community doesn't really want to hear because they just want what they want right now, and I don't blame them for that because I'm with them. That being said, I did see that there were other districts, Santa Rosa County being one, that made it effective immediately, and so I did speak with Mr. Duggan as far as whether the option to do a 90-day emergency policy would fall under it. I'm not an attorney, but I did some due diligence, and I believe we could fall under the emergency policy of a 90-day, very similar to when we adopted it before. And that would include the entire board being on board with that. So one, just procedurally, can we do it? Because I think we need to be honest about it. And then the reason if we're not, why? But alternatively, if that's not something the board would like to move forward with, which I'll say again, I would like to see that be something we move forward effective immediately, even understanding some of the confusion. But that regardless, we talk about the policy sunsetting June 30th, but the reality is, we talk about optional, we're going to need to adopt a policy for optional regardless. And so if the board is not, and I recognize I may be on my own here, is not supportive of invoking a 90-day policy in the event we could, for it to be effective immediately, that it be optional, that I would ask that the superintendent draft proposed policy to be presented at their next July meeting for the optional mask policy language, because that will have to take 30 days to be adopted and advertised, and that would put us into July, and therefore we're giving proper notice to families and staff that that's the direction we're going for it to be adopted.
Thank you. Karen?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just would like to share that there's been, in recent months, an outpouring of community members and wanting options, and I did make a commitment to being the voice of our community. We obviously still have some families that want to wear a mask. The outpouring of optional masks has grown significantly, and I would like to explore from a legal standpoint what that means. If that exists, as Mrs. Ziegler mentioned, to make it optional, I would, if we were to look at that, I would like to continue with the social distancing and the shields, so that we are truly listening to the community and not necessarily disrupting all of the events that are upcoming in the next few weeks. I feel like we've had a lot of conversation on this board about communication, about listening to our community, about subgroups, whether it's families, whether it's staff, not feeling like they have a voice. I feel like this conversation has merit to talk through and be very transparent with it. I would like to see a win-win where we looked at, we no longer have an emergency order in the state of Florida. Our numbers are trending down by the day. If anything, I look for the rationale and the logic of substantiating any changes in masks based on an emergency. For me, it's almost like the emergency has been deleted by the state of Florida based on our trends and our numbers. But the win-win for me is giving families the option of deciding whether they send their child to school with a mask and or without, and that we continue with the the distancing requirements and with the shields, and try to look at working with the voice that represents the community across the board in these last few weeks. But I think that getting a greater understanding of what this means from a policy or a change standpoint, and if that is even something that the board desires.
I know the outpouring of emails we received when we were writing up that policy, and the number of parents and teachers who were pleading with us to protect their kids and protect our staff by having the mask policy. And I know if we were then to change it, especially now with less than a month of school to go, I mean, and these parents have made decisions on putting their kids, in face-to-face learning, and we've got tests coming up and all of these other things. I think if we were to make a change to that, it would put our schools in such a disarray that it would cause all types of confusion. I mean, whether or not we can legally make that change or not, but the CDC is still saying students need to wear their masks. Brennan?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to chime in on this issue. I know I don't have a vote, but I did want to chime in on it. First of all, just I think, I don't want to speak for everybody, but, I get both sides of this issue. I'll get, emails that say we need to definitely drop the masks. We get emails that say definitely do not, and make sure you keep the masks because my child is there, because I know the masks are there. So we get both of those, and, you get emails from that as well. Personally, I know I can't wait until we go optional on masks. I think most of the people in our school district can't wait for that to happen as we move into next school year and get things back to as normal as possible. Two things related to this. Number one would be what Michael Drennan just talked about the CDC, and I know there's a paragraph about that, and it talks about schools specifically and keeping our policies in place until the beginning of next school year. So I think that that's a really good idea. I think that creating a policy, our optional mask policy that we're going to have ready for next school year and have that ready for a board meeting in July, I think that's very appropriate and definitely needs to happen. But the other side of it too that I wanted to mention is the educational side. And you all know I've been an educator my whole life, and I've been a principal for 10 years, 5 in middle and 5 in elementary. 5 in middle and 5 in high school. And I talked to the principals again this morning, and my conversation with every single one of them on Zoom was, look, things are starting to change. We're seeing different things happen. You watch the news. It's all going on out there. Where do you all stand on this? Because I know for a fact that anytime you have a major change in policy that affects the whole district, it impacts every single school. And I wanted to know from the principals, how's that going to impact you? If it's not going to impact you and you think everything's going to be great, then tell me that so that I can let the board know, and then they'll have a better opportunity to make a good decision on what they want to do with masks. And I'll tell you, the consensus in that principals meeting was basically what I thought, and that is, look, we have 3 weeks left of school. We're in the middle of testing. We have all of our plans already planned out all the way through the rest of the school year. And our stakeholders know exactly where we stand, what's going on. We need to be consistent and keep things the way that they are for the rest of the school year so that we don't create a chaotic situation or even a situation that's just a disruption where now all of a sudden we're doing a lot of emails about masks and a lot of phone calls about masks. Why did you stop the policy? And so, or having to change the plans that we have. And I know with graduations, for instance, the venues have already been chosen. There's only so much room at the venues. Elementary principals are even doing things with their 5th grade, and some of them have drive-throughs that they're already planned out. Some of them have venues that they already planned out at 25%. To go and make changes at this point in time with everything going on at school, I think would be a mistake from an educational standpoint and from a standpoint of elementary students need routine. They thrive off routine. They have to have it. And we're right here at the end of the school year. We only have 3 weeks left. It probably would be the best idea to continue on with what we're doing, finish out this school year, make a new plan for next school year, get that approved and move forward. So, with all that said, again, I think we all would love to get rid of these masks. I know I would. I know everybody sitting out here, our whole cabinet, all the principals, everybody I've talked to, get rid of them at some point. But right now, it's a timing issue, and right now is not the right time, especially looking at it from an educational standpoint, staying consistent. So I just wanted to bring up that side of it as well as you think about what you want to do.
We have 15 minutes before we go into the executive session. The evaluation will move to the next workshop so we can finish this discussion. Jane?
I won't belabor it. I will just say that, I've received a lot of texts and phone calls and emails from parents who do not want us to change the mask mandate. They feel that they'd have to take their child back to remote. And next year, what I hope is that we can start school and have no concurrent teaching, that we can start school without masks, that we can be free on the playground. So let's give it the rest of this year as is, not making any changes, and go forward with a new plan next year.
Tom?
I'll be brief. I have been here since November, and the topic du jour is always masks. And I respect our parents' right to peacefully protest policy, and I encourage that, and enjoy the feedback. And I, as you know, according to the newspaper today, I requested that we talk about it, and I think it was a good idea that we did, because a lot of us have been vilified in this process of trying to protect our children, protect our employees, and protect our staff. So I just wanted everybody to know that we were willing to look and see, and even myself included, to say, is there something that we could do that would compromise, that we can show that we're listening and that we're trying and that we can give something back, which is why my quote even in the newspaper said, is it outside? I didn't know the answer to that until we sat here, we heard each other speak, we heard from the health department. And so, and even Dr. Asplin and I have had several conversations, and that conversation about our principals, all of the work that they've done, I can't ask these folks to do one more thing. They have done so much this year. They have bent themselves over backwards, and I couldn't possibly for a minute ask them to make a change. So I hope the public hears that we were open to a conversation, open to a potential change, but the decision to keep it as is I think, the best way.
Bridget?
Thank you. Mr. Duggan, can you just verify, just from a starting point, would a 90-day emergency policy to make it effective immediately that masks are optional, is that legally an option for this board to consider?
So I'm answering a very narrow question about procedure here. I'm not touching on some of the practical concerns that have been raised. I think there's also some room to have a full conversation about the risk avoidance from a legal standpoint on some of this as part of that decision. But from a purely procedural standpoint, the short answer to your question is yes, there is a mechanism. Now, the default rule is for policy changes such as repeals or modifications to be generally a deliberate process that requires a combination of policies and statutes, and it typically requires a time period to advertise, to make notice to the public so that the public can have input. From a practical standpoint, for the rest of the year, I'm not certain that if you followed the normal process that there is time. I think the school year will end before that process statutorily and policy-wise could play out. However, That is the process for non-emergencies. There is a statutory process for emergency policy modifications and repeals and that type of thing. So you'd have to figure out how you want to set it up, whether that's a repeal or a modification or a new rule. But there is a process for that type of action to unfold, and that is statutory. And it requires, though, that there be an immediate danger to the public health, safety, and welfare. And if the board found that that situation existed, that type of emergency situation, the board would be empowered to adopt a rule that would address the immediate danger. So that would be up to the board to decide whether the continued mandatory wearing of masks is an immediate danger to the public health, safety, and welfare. Now, if the board did make such a finding, there's a couple of other things that go along with this process. The process has to be what the statute says is fair under the circumstances. To me, what that means is that there be some procedural protections based on law, the Constitution, things like that. And what that typically means is basic due process. What basic due process is notice and the opportunity for people to be heard on the matter. So my recommendation in light of that would be, if the board were willing to consider that, to there be a sufficient short time period where the public would have the opportunity to participate in that, consistent with basic due process and consistent with Florida's open meeting laws under the Sunshine Laws. One of the other statutory requirements involves, if you are going to take emergency action, to make specific facts and reasons for the findings of the immediate danger. I think that would frankly take some time to do that the appropriate way, where there is at least some amount of transparency on this. Not a long time. I think this can be done in a matter of less than a week, certainly. So there is time to do an emergency motion. If we were going to do that, I think that you're going to want to not only make broad policy edicts, I think you're also going to want to be able to support those with competent, substantial evidence, authoritative sources. Certainly the CDC's guidelines and guidance is one, but there's others from the Florida Surgeon General, and even within the CDC's guidelines, there are authoritative studies that talk about, less impact on students and that type of thing. But that would be, again, these are all policy things for the board. I think the threshold determination is whether an emergency exists. I think you have some power, if that is the case, to adopt a 90-day policy. You want to put some thought into the procedure and have some basic public transparency and have some findings that are supported by evidence, because there would be the opportunity for appeals of, when substantial interests are affected. So, and that would involve a administrative and legal process. So ultimately, at the end of the day, there needs to be some type of competent evidence that supports the determination that an emergency exists.
Okay, thank you for that. Just for the clarification, and I'll add that I don't take, I am big on transparency, and taking a vote that has such a impassioned position by many people in the community on varying sides wouldn't be something I would want to quickly do. Certainly, if I look at other places, they've called special meetings, but from a mechanism standpoint, I certainly just wanted to clarify if that's something we had the option for a table to discuss, and whether or not, knowing that, I would argue that we have substantial evidence that we can indicate. Mrs. Rose highlighted some areas of what has changed. So I just wanted to clarify if that's an option. The other part is, I recognize there's 3 weeks left in school, and I think, evaluating the disruption to instruction is key. I would be remiss if I say, when we reference CDC, all due respect, they're not voted in, I will say, voted in, and they have ever-changing items that I think substantively lack consistency, which has caused frustration for everyone, no matter where you sit on certain issues. But the 3 weeks left I'd be remiss, is that this is something I brought up back in February for us to evaluate, and now it seems like it's been punted. And I recognize everyone's trying to do the best they can, evaluate the data, but we continue to trend down. And so I believe it's left in our hands to listen to the community and determine what is the best piece going forward. Again, I'd like to see us move forward with an adoption of an emergency policy, and we could schedule an emergency meeting to do that, so that we give the public notice. Because I argue that there have been plenty of families and such, and it's growing, that are done with it. They're confident with where we're at and moving towards that, with more and more people being vaccinated. Finally, again, if this is not, the majority of the board is not in support of moving that direction, I would ask that, again, at the very next meeting that we have a policy drafted to vote on our board agenda item for optional moving into the school year. So that way we've made it very clear that we're not going to continue to punt and watch. So we find ourselves 2-3 weeks out from school start and in the same situation. So that's my position.
As chair, I would find it very difficult to call an emergency meeting that the public health and safety is at risk by keeping our masks. I think we would get so much from parents, just judging from what we had before, that it would be more at risk if we took the masks off those kids now. And again, we got 3 weeks of school, and teachers have their plans and everything else. I would be reluctant to call an emergency meeting as chair. I guess I could be outvoted on that, but as chair, I wouldn't want to, and it doesn't sound like the superintendent would want to either from his comments. It would upset the plans that our schools have and what our parents have come to understand in our schools. I would like perhaps to ask our assistant if she could get us a copy of that policy so that we could look at it and maybe bring it back at the meeting, that we can all look at it, what it says, if you want to make any changes to bring them forward. But at this time, something this important about children's health that we know our parents are passionate about, I just don't see how we can call an emergency meeting and get the correct input and whatnot before we can make a decision on that. I just, and we've been following the CDC and the health department guidelines. I don't think now is the time to make that change. The only one I would be concerned about would be at the administration building and in the boardroom. Do we want to make changes there? But again, we've got just a few weeks left, and we'll see how that goes. With no further comments, thank you, Dr. Drennan. We'll probably hear from you this afternoon or later today. And we might get a few minutes if Denise could tell us real briefly what this superintendent review is before we run across to have our executive session. Can you give us a 2-minute update, Denise?
Yes, Denise will come up and just very quickly run through this.
And we can put it back on the agenda for the next time.
Okay.
You can sit down here. Are you going to sit up there?
Just run the screen here,
Okay.
if it comes up. So this morning, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. So in 2 minutes, I'll go through this pretty quickly. About a week and a half ago, Ms. Brown gave me a draft appraisal for the superintendent. I took that appraisal, I went through it. She asked me to find a rating scale that would be appropriate and one that we could use this year. So in front of you, you have a hard copy of it, but when we do disseminate this, it will be digital. And you can see that there is 10 goals on the summary sheet in front. There was originally 8, but 2 were necessary to add, I believe. One is called reactive leadership, and the other is proactive leadership. Reactive leadership would be something that would be defined probably annually, or however often the superintendent is evaluated. It would look at things that happened that year that perhaps were different, they'd be unique every year, and how the leader would approach those situations. Some of them really critical, like the year we just went through. Proactive leadership has to do with designing things for the current year or for the future, looking at the state of the district and designing activities to bring us forward. So if you look up here, this is exactly what you have in your hand, and you would fill out each goal. So if you go to number 1, goal area relationship with the board, so there are descriptors underneath that which really define the goal. It's really very simple. You would then look over here and you would click and rate on that goal. We use the same key or rating scale as we did with the teachers, from highly effective to unsatisfactory. As soon as you put the number in, if you went back to the individual summary, it would be populated. So it's real simple rating scale to use. All the descriptors are there. Under every goal, you'll be able to add comments and recommendations. When you're done, after you've done all 10 goals, you would just save it and you could email it back to me and I would aggregate the results. That's the 2-minute version.
Does anyone, if you have any changes that you'd like to make to this, please forward them to Kathy.
Sure.
And otherwise, we will go forward with this. At this time, I would like to recess our work session, and the board will reconvene in executive session. Okay, our attorney is going to put us in the correct posture here. Is your mic on?
So we are here today on the record at a specially set board meeting to conduct a litigation strategy session in the Jimenez-Ruiz versus school board matter. There is a statutory process to follow, and that is Florida Statute 286.011, which is the Florida's open meeting law, and subsection 8 of that particular statute permits, upon request of legal counsel to the board, to conduct a private litigation strategy session. You may recall at our most recent board meeting, we asked for that authorization, and by vote of the board, that authorization was given. And pursuant to that, I would now like to move the portion of the meeting to the private section of the meeting. There will be a certified court reporter present, transcribing everything that is said there, and the people who are permitted to participate by statute will participate in that meeting. At the conclusion of that private portion of the meeting, we will return to this room and officially conclude the meeting and announce that it is privately concluded on the public record. And just for the record, the time right now is 2:03, and we will now conclude the public portion of the meeting and move to the private portion of the meeting.
Thank you.